Today we'll talk about probably the strangest escape from the Soviet Union. Unable to legally leave the country, Stanislav Kurilov began preparing for an escape. This thought had been growing in him for a long time. A real opportunity came unexpectedly when he saw an announcement about a cruise on the liner Soviet Union. In December 1974, the ship was set to sail from Vladivostok to the equator and back, without entering any foreign ports.
Since the ship did not dock in foreign ports, no exit visa was required to take part in the cruise. After studying the map and calculating the optimal route, on the night of December 13, 1974, Stanislav jumped from the stern from a height of more than 12 meters. Without food or water, Kurilov swam in the open ocean for almost 3 days. He survived and reached the shore of Siergaya Island. Due to navigation problems and ocean currents, the planned 18 kilometers turned into almost 100. Kurilov later said that his endurance was the result of many years of practicing yoga.
His desire to escape from the communist state was even stronger than his fear of death. But this will not just be a story about a man. This will be a story told in the first person. We will dive into his inner world and learn everything directly from him. I promise it will be interesting. I'm Jacob, welcome to the channel where the Russian accent is strong and the stories hit even stronger. Let's get into it.
At that time, the Soviet Union had strict restrictions on traveling abroad, especially to capitalist countries. To obtain permission to leave, a person had to pass approval through a number of institutions. If you wanted to visit a capitalist country, the situation became 5 times more complicated. Sometimes a travel ban was imposed without explanation, and the person could spend years not knowing why they were placed on the list of unreliable citizens. This was especially difficult for scientists and diplomats who needed to travel frequently. Many people accepted their status as non-travelers and came to terms with it. Others tried to get rid of this mark by any means possible. In this situation, a new concept appeared: non-returners. These were people who had been allowed to travel to the West but decided to stay there forever, cutting their ties with their homeland. However, the story of oceanographer Stanislav Kurilov stands out among them. Perhaps no one had ever made such a strange and dangerous escape from Soviet Union as he did. He had been rejected by the Naval Academy because of his nearsightedness. After serving in the army, he managed to enroll in the Leningrad Hydrometeorological Institute.
In truth, Kurilov was obsessed with the ocean. He mastered the professions of diver and scuba instructor, and he taught deep-sea diving at the Institute of Marine Biology in Vladivostok. He also studied yoga on his own and achieved some success.
The legendary Jacques-Yves Cousteau even offered him a chance to work on a joint project abroad. Yet all his attempts to go on business trips ended in refusal. He had participated in secret underwater experiments, visited a military base in Sevastopol, and most importantly, had a relative abroad. His older sister Angela married an Indian man and lived with him in capitalist Canada.
I think we can end the brief biography of our hero and move on to Stanislav Kurilov's own recollections.
That day, when I was once again denied a visa to work on oceanographic vessels for long-distance expeditions, my patience finally ran out. Usually, they refused without explanation, but this time my personal file contained a note: Comrade Kurilov's visits to capitalist countries are considered inappropriate, a lifetime sentence with no hope of freedom. At that moment, I lost all fear. It's impossible to accept that, having been born on this beautiful blue planet, you are locked for life inside a communist state for the sake of some foolish ideas. There was only one way out: to flee. Anywhere. Just to flee. And then, one gloomy, overcast day, I read a newspaper announcement. In a month, a large passenger liner would sail to the equator with tourists on board. No visas were required. For 20 days, the ship would be in open ocean without entering any foreign ports. The cruise was called From Winter to Summer. The boarding point was Vladivostok. I had only a few days to think.
A wild joy awakened inside me. I would see the tropics. They are offering me a ticket to another planet, Kurilov kept repeating to himself. He immediately realized that his journey could only be one way. There could be no talk of return. He was driven by an irresistible desire to break free from the Soviet Empire.
I went to say goodbye to my friends. I had a ticket for the ship, but I couldn't tell them about it. I knew I might never return, and I wanted to see them one more time. That evening I couldn't speak. I just silently looked at them. The departure of the liner was scheduled for December 8th.
The ship Soviet Union had been built in Germany in 1930s. During the war it was sunk and later raised from the bottom by Soviet specialists. By the early 1970s, it was still the largest cargo passenger ship in the country. The liner never entered ports of the free world, where it could have been detained.
The liner was the worst possible choice for escape, like a well-built prison. Its whole line did not go straight down. Like most ships, it curved outward like a barrel. If someone were to fall overboard, they wouldn't drop straight into the water, but hit the rounded side just below the waterline. On both sides of the ship, from bow to stern, underwater metal wings, about 1.5 meters wide, were welded to the hull. To jump overboard, one had to run along the deck and dive headfirst, like a swallow, to enter the water as far from the hull and those wings as possible. Such a jump was difficult to perform from the upper decks, where there was enough space to run. Their height exceeded 20 meters. At full speed, only Tarzan himself could have done it.
After carefully inspecting the ship's stern with an eye of a future fugitive, Stanislav realized that there were only two possible places to jump, between the blades of the giant propeller and the ends of the underwater wings, where the water streams was deflected away from the hull.
Before departure, we only knew the general outline of the route. The entire course, from the Tsushima straight to the equator, was kept secret, but it was clear that the liner would not enter any foreign port. The tourists were delighted to learn that throughout the entire voyage they would be able to sunbathe under the tropical sun, swim in pools, and admire the colorful panorama of the ocean. There were only a few hours left before departure. We gathered in our cabin to celebrate the beginning of the voyage and the start of our vacation. I looked around at the faces, cheerful, festively dressed people. No one suspected that something extraordinary would happen on this cruise. We all had different fates. They were here to have a pleasant vacation, and I perhaps had only a few days left before escaping into the unknown. Then the captain's voice came through the loudspeaker. "Prepare for departure. Everyone take your positions." Those words sounded to me like a sentence. At that moment, I felt it was time to say farewell to my homeland.
What do you think would happen if several hundred strong, healthy young men spent 20 days in close quarters with an even greater number of beautiful young women?
It was enough to go down the gangway to the living decks. You could hear the roar of voices, feel the air thick with the smell of alcohol and perfume. Behind every cabin door there was music, songs, dancing, laughter, and women's screams. The endless noise of arguments, drunken shouting, moans of passion, constant toasts, and the clinking of glasses. Before me, a man planning something forbidden, stood a very difficult task. I had to somehow determine the ship's exact position. To my great joy, on the third day of the voyage, our mysterious route was revealed. In one of the ship's lounges, we saw a map of the Western Pacific Ocean, showing the liner's path to the equator and back. Naturally, it was only an approximate route map, and it couldn't be fully trusted. On the other hand, it was reasonable to assume that in order to shorten the route, the captain might be forced to approach the shore near the small island of Siargao, or perhaps near the southern tip of the island in Mindanao. After a thorough analysis of the route, I clearly understood that I would be able to leave the liner only at one of those 2 points. The sun rose over the island. The air was still fairly cool. Tourists poured out onto the upper decks, filling every space. The island was still quite far away. The mountains looked blue from here, and even though binoculars, it was hard to see any details. Maybe I should try here. No, my time hadn't come yet. Near the island of Luzon, the captain unexpectedly changed course, and we approached the shore so closely that we could see palm trees just 5 or 6 miles away. It was impossible to squeeze through the side of the ship. It seemed that both the tourists and the crew had rushed up to the decks to see the shores of foreign land. It was the almost uninhabited eastern coast of Luzon, somewhere between 17 and 18 degrees north latitude. Suddenly, I was struck by a terrifying thought. Very soon, inevitably, the ship would turn back from the tropics, back to the Soviet Union. No, never. No force on earth could make me return. Just one jump separated me from that tempting beauty and from freedom. It was unthinkable to do it in broad daylight, under hundreds of watching eyes. A lifeboat would be lowered instantly. Night. Night is the time for escape. Escapes from prisons happen at night. I had to wait for the right night.
From the recollections of a friend, some thought he was strange. He trained scientists to dive on an empty stomach, taught them yoga, could fast for 40 days, cleansed his body with seawater using a special method, and hardened himself by swimming naked in the sea every morning, saying that only this way could one fully merge with the element of water.
When preparing for the cruise, I didn't take a compass with me. As a precaution, I thought I probably wouldn't need it anyway, since I could only leave the ship near the shore. I could always determine direction by the sun or the stars. During clear nights, I walked along the upper deck with a map in my hands, trying to locate and memorize the unfamiliar southern constellations. One starry night, as I stood at the rail without a map, gazing intently at the sky, a girl approached me. Usually, walking couples passed me with a smirk. "See something special up here?" she asked with a smile. "I'm looking for my lucky star," I replied evasively. I used to think my happiness was somewhere among the stars too. I am an astronomer, so in a way, we're colleagues.
She turned out to be a real find for Kurilov. Thanks to her, he soon learned to recognize all the visible stars of those latitudes fairly well, and even knew at what approximate angle each constellation could be expected.
The liner was approaching the 10th degree of north latitude, the island of Siargao, the very point I had marked for my escape. I could leave the ship unnoticed at night, near the shore. It was supposed to happen tomorrow, December 13th. 13 is not the luckiest date for a risky adventure, but I had no choice. I asked the astronomer girl to come with me to the navigation room. Inside, there were only the captain's assistant on duty and the sailor at the wheel. While the girl spoke with the assistant, I approached the navigation chart. The liner was still far north of Siargao, but the course line was drawn about 10 nautical miles from the shore. To my joy, I noticed that the island was mountainous, meaning it would be visible from afar. Its length was only 19 nautical miles, which meant we would be sailing parallel to the coastline for about an hour. Around 8 o'clock in the evening, ship time, the liner would be roughly opposite the middle of the island. Far below the stern, in the glow of the searchlights, I saw the stream of water thrown back by the ship's propeller. I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The bright light began a little further from the stern. So, anything falling overboard would drop into the shadow, not into the beam of light. I thought tomorrow, around this same hour, I would be overboard.
Life on the liner had turned into a never-ending carnival. People tried to forget themselves by any means. Everyone knew that very soon, this illusory life lasting only 20 days would come to an end, and they would all return home. On December 12th, as he went to bed, he couldn't help but think that it was his last night on the ship, and perhaps not only on the ship.
That day, December 13th, became one of the most unforgettable days of my life. I no longer had control over the situation. The decisions had been made, the hour set. I took my swimming gear and went to the stern of the liner. Then the jump into darkness and complete uncertainty. I didn't go breakfast. I was present at lunch but didn't eat anything. The stomach must be completely empty before a long swim. I knew that from experience. In the morning, I performed cleansing yoga exercises, drank 2 liters of water and passed it through my intestines. bypassing the bladder, along with several other rather complex purifications and breathing techniques. I never ate before diving. Even a small amount of food in the stomach made it hard to breathe underwater. Darkness fell. An impenetrably black night. The liner was approaching the northern tip of Siargao Island. I climbed up to the very top deck, but even though binoculars, I couldn't see anything. There wasn't a single light where the island should have been. What if the captain had changed course, and we were further from the shore than I thought? It was around 7 in the evening. I took one last look where the island was supposed to be. The sky was completely covered with thick clouds. Lightning flashed in different parts of the horizon almost continuously. A storm was coming. Good, I thought. In stormy weather, the captain wouldn't risk sending a lifeboat to search for me. I would have the whole night. I went into the restaurant near the end of dinner just to be seen. From a practical standpoint, my chances of reaching the shore alive were as follows. If I didn't crash upon hitting the water, if I wasn't eaten by sharks, if I didn't drown from exhaustion or choking, if I wasn't killed on the reefs, if I had enough breath and strength to reach land, and if I were still alive by then, only then could I perhaps thank fate for a miracle of survival.
Kurilov had to cover about 100 meters from his cabin in the bow to the deck exit, and then another 100 in the open air to the stern. In his hands he carried a bag with fins, a mask and a snorkel. Over his swimming gear he casually threw a towel.
I had carefully studied all the corridors and turns along my route, just in case I was pursued. I knew of many cases where even the most well-planned escapes were discovered. If my intentions were exposed, my only chance would be to reach the deck and jump from the mast, from anywhere. I walked slowly down the corridor. It felt as if I were walking a tightrope over an abyss.
He had read his first book on yoga in his first year at the institute. Naturally, he studied it on his own. Yoga postures and physical exercises came easily to Kurilov, but cleansing practices, breathing control, spiritual work, and meditation were much harder. He practiced from 2 to 12 hours a day. He bathed in icy water, sat naked in the snow. After 10 years, he reached samadhi, a term meaning complete calm of consciousness and reconciliation between the inner and outer worlds. It felt as though everything around, the walls, the pipes, even the vacuum cleaner left in the corridor, somehow knew where I was going and silently wished me luck. In the lead part of the deck that I had crossed, the dancing had already begun. I had already said goodbye to my homeland back in Vladivostok Bay. Now I was fleeing from the Soviet Union. I went down the stairs to the stern of the main deck. There stood a floating cot, and 3 sailors were sitting on it. I couldn't jump in front of them. The alarm man overboard would be raised instantly, and the searchlights would start sweeping the sea. I climbed back up to the boat deck, thinking over the situation. There was almost no time left. In half an hour, according to my calculations, the liner would pass the island. There was no longer any point in waiting. I had to jump, even if the entire crew could see me. He went down again. 2 sailors had gone somewhere, and the third was making his bed on the cot, his back turned. Kurilov leaned one hand on the railing, swung his body overboard, and pushed off hard. The flight over the water felt endless. I had calculated the trajectory well. Once in the air, I quickly turned my body, my legs toward the stern, my back to the water's surface. Surfacing, I turned my head and froze in terror. Right beside me, at arm's length, loomed the massive hull of the liner and its gigantic spinning propeller. I could almost physically feel the movement of its blades. They were mercilessly slicing through the water right next to me.
I made desperate efforts to swim away, but got caught in a dense mass of swirling water tightly bound to the propeller. Suddenly, something threw me to the side. I had been caught in a strong current of water flowing from the right of the propeller. Holding my breath, I tried to stay below the surface until the large beam of the ship's searchlights passed over me. For a moment, everything was completely dark. Then I drifted into a band of bright light. I thought they had spotted me, caught me in the beam of the spotlight, but soon total darkness returned. I threw away the now useless towel, put on my mask and snorkel, and took several deep breaths. The water was fairly warm. At that temperature, one could swim for a long time. I put on my fins and gloves with webbings between the fingers. The bag was no longer needed. My watch, with its glowing dial, showed 8:15 p.m. ship's time. Later, I threw it away when I noticed it had stopped. The liner was rapidly disappearing into the distance. I felt immense relief. I had just escaped alive and unharmed from a deadly spinning propeller. And then silence fell. An overwhelming, absolute silence. I still didn't fully grasp what had happened. There was no help to expect, and almost no chance of reaching the shore alive. All around me was nothing, only black storm clouds and not a single light. Filling my lungs with air, I started to swim, pushing upward until half my body rose above the surface. All I could see were the crests of huge waves and the night sky. The liner had vanished. Again and again, I turned in every direction, searching for its lights. If I see the side lights, I thought, it means the liner is turning back. They've noticed my disappearance. If I see the stern lights, it means they haven't. Not yet. At last, as I rose atop a giant wave, I saw the distant, fading lights of the decks and the enormous black silhouette of the stern. I exhaled in relief. Even if they gave the order "man overboard" now, the liner would already be far away, carried forward by inertia. To the west, where the island was supposed to be, there were no visible lights. For another half hour, he kept nervously watching, expecting to see the ship's side lights appear, but his fears were in vain. At first, I swam by orienting myself toward the faint, retreating lights of the liner. Again and again, the enormous waves slowly lifted and dropped me. Only from the crest of the highest could I see the horizon and the blurry glow of the departing ship. I kept losing my direction. Swimming was extremely difficult in such rough water. Slowly, I climbed over the liquid hills. It felt as if I were crawling across sand dunes in a desert. Lightning flashed often in the west, and thunder rolled across the sky. Heavy storm clouds hung low above me. Wind tore spray from the waves, whipping my face with sharp, needle-like droplets. Almost every wave carried a glowing crest that broke apart with a roar. It was hard to breathe. The waves often covered me completely. Before each breath, I had to blow the water out of my snorkel. I carefully controlled my breathing, taking a short test inhale first, then, after a forceful exhale, a deep breath, holding it for about a minute until I felt the first slight urge to breathe again. The liner was now far away, and I finally felt completely calm. No one had seen me. Enough time had passed since the escape. Still, I kept drifting, of course, again and again, swimming blindly through the watery hills until the tallest wave lifted me to see its peak. Then I would spot the liner's light, not to my left as I expected, but behind me, or to the right, or even ahead. I would turn west again and think back into the dark valley between waves. I didn't think about sharks. All my attention was focused on maintaining direction and breathing. I had gotten used to using the ship's lights as my only reference, but then realized it couldn't last much longer. Soon, the liner would disappear completely. What would I do then? It was impossible to navigate by the wind. It could change at any moment. Only one relatively constant reference remained: the position of clouds. The southern horizon was darker than the others, while in the west, lightning flicked and large storm clouds moved toward me. If I kept watching the changing clouds, I could swim for several more hours in the right direction. I often stared toward the western horizon, still hoping to see the coastal lights of the island, but that hope was in vain. At last, the liner disappeared completely, and I was left all alone, without a single landmark. In a stormy night ocean, the clouds soon hung directly above my head, and heavy rain began to pour. Do you know what thought crossed my mind at that moment? Where could I wait until it was over? The arrangement of the clouds had changed so much that he began to doubt his chosen direction. Kurilov could only look at the sky while holding his breath. It broke his rhythm. Then he had to focus entirely on his snorkel for a while, ignoring everything else. When I finally realized that I no longer had any points of reference, I stopped and decided to wait until morning. But staying in one place meant losing energy. The current would carry me far away, and by dawn the distance to the island would be much greater. And then fear began to rise within me. Waves of fear spread from my arms and legs, reached my heart and seized my mind. Fear started to choke me. My breathing became rapid, and I felt I was suffocating. The crests of waves still crashed over me, flooding my snorkel, and I realized that in this state I wouldn't last even half an hour in the water. At that moment, a thought flashed through my mind. My situation wasn't hopeless at all. I was simply destroying myself with fear. I gathered all my willpower and faced the fear head-on. Gradually, it began to fade. I felt I could breathe evenly and deeply again. Back on the ship, while planning his escape, he had been so focused on the first stage, getting off the liner, that he hadn't thought about the second, reaching land alive. Several agonizing hours passed. I tried only to stay afloat, conserving strength. Then another huge black cloud crept up and poured streams of flash rainwater over me. I managed to take 2 or 3 gulps by moving my snorkel aside and holding my breath. I wasn't thirsty yet, but who knew how long I would be without water? The clouds thinned, and among them appeared a few lonely stars. Throughout a break in the clouds, I suddenly saw a very bright one. It could only be the planet Jupiter. I immediately memorized the surrounding cloud formations, in case the planet disappeared again, and confidently began swimming westward. Jupiter vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, but now I had a reliable direction for at least a few more hours. A little later, when the clouds parted wider, I saw Orion's belt on the southeast. Now I could swim in a straight line, almost without drifting, of course. While moving, I didn't feel cold, but when I simply floated on the surface, a slight chill crept in. The approaching dawn dimmed all my stars, and I suddenly felt my loneliness more sharply. I swam slower, guided only by the position of the clouds. The rising sun appeared above the ocean. A new wave of fear struck my heart. Real danger was approaching. My ghostly island had vanished. Land had to be somewhere close. The island of Mindanao lay about 100 miles away. Suddenly, I remembered another threat, no less serious. By now, they must have discovered my disappearance on the liner. The ship could return. In daylight, they could easily find me and, like a guilty kitten, pull me out of the water. That thought hit me like a whip. No, anything but that. As long as I had strength, I would keep swimming. I tried not to think about sharks, though fear followed close behind my thoughts. My undershirt was orange. Somewhere I had read that this color repelled sharks, but right before departure I came across another article that claimed exactly the opposite. Through the towering waves, I scanned the horizons and suddenly saw a large ship to the south. I had good reason to fear not only the return of the liner, but also any ship from so-called people's democracies of the Third World. All of them would hand a fugitive back to the Soviet Union. I watched the ship closely, trying to determine its course, but it wasn't approaching. I could see it all the time, just on the horizon. These fears weren't unfounded. The liner really had turned back, and they were searching for him. His relatives were later told that Stanislav had gone missing. After noon, far to the west, I noticed a thick cluster of cumulus clouds. In all other directions, the clouds kept forming and dispersing, but there they stubbornly stayed in one place, like a mountain of whipped cream. And most importantly, among them, I saw faint, motionless outlines. I knew that clouds always hovered above mountains, and the island was mountainous. I remembered that from the map. Again and again, I climbed the peak of waves, staring at the horizon with pounding heart, trying to make out, was it just clouds or finally my long-lost island? The sun broke through the clouds and shone straight into my face. It was around 2 in the afternoon. Now the motionless outline of the island was visible from any position. I no longer needed to wait for the highest wave to see it. It rose high above the horizon, framed on both sides by white towers of cumulus clouds. I was almost certain it was Siargao. Land. I couldn't resist shouting that wonderful word, and heard the hoarse sound of my own voice. At that moment I felt almost like a victor. The sun came out from behind the clouds one last time, as if to say goodbye, and disappeared again. My second night in the ocean began. One by one the stars appeared unnoticed. To the west, where my mysterious island was supposed to be, I saw many lights. They flickered along the horizon and even higher above it, probably small villagers scattered along the mountain slopes. After a full day in the water, I felt neither exhaustion nor pain. My breathing was deep and steady, swimming felt easy. I wasn't tormented by hunger or thirst, yet often, behind my back, I heard sighs and rustling sounds that made me turn around. I constantly felt some kind of presence nearby. From time to time, strange noises arose, sounds that couldn't exist on land, and then, as if by magic, everything went silent again. That living, enveloping silence was even more frightening. In the last few hours, I had noticeably approached the island, so much that I believed I could reach it that very night, or at worst, by morning. A sudden, sharp cramp in my neck and chest made me flinch from pain. Not far away, I noticed strange glowing sticks protruding at an angle, slowly drifting closer. I quickly swam to the side. I had no time for scientific curiosity. The glowing rods passed about 5 meters away. Later I learned that they were Physalia jellyfish. Their tentacles can reach 15 meters and cause severe burns, fever and even paralysis. I was very lucky not to fall into their deadly embrace. The island now looked like one enormous rock, colored in every shade of pink, from a soft hue at the top to a pinkish brown at its base. My legs began to tire and I swam slower, trying to switch to other muscles. But the relief didn't last long. I couldn't allow myself to lose focus even for a minute. I had to constantly control my breathing. I took very deep breaths, but at such slow rhythm, it was easy to inhale fine droplets of water directly into the lungs and then start coughing. I knew from experience, both on and under the water, how difficult it was to swim even a short distance in such a state, to the shore or to a boat. I didn't feel like eating or drinking at all. I had prepared myself mentally for the most unpredictable conditions. It seemed to me that I could easily survive 2 weeks without water and about a month without food. And after that, well, something would always turn up. A few more hours passed. To my joy, I noticed that the southern edge of the island, especially near the horizon, looked slightly darker, meaning it must be closer. I changed course and headed southwest. Later I realized this was an unforgivable mistake. Evening approached. Ahead, I could now clearly see the island. It seemed uninhabited. I saw no signs of life, no smoke, no lights, no buildings. In my uncontrollable imagination, I was already thinking of all the happy possibilities of exploring it. It was so close I could almost reach out my hand. About an hour passed, maybe more, and then, first with surprise, then with horror, he realized his mistake. The island was slowly shifting northward, continuing relentlessly in that direction right before his eyes. Before I understood what was happening, I turned sharply north and saw directly ahead the southern tip of the island, and beyond it the open ocean stretching to the horizon. I was completely at the mercy of the current. To my horror, I saw it carrying me past the land. No matter how hard I swam, no matter how desperately I tried to squeeze out the last strength from my exhausted muscles, the distance between me and the shore did not decrease. I still clung to hope, One last chance that the rising tide might carry me toward the beach, but the shore slowly drifted farther and farther away. I realized I had no more chances to reach the enchanted island. I was terribly tired and hung motionless in the water. Dusk was falling. Large, gentle waves slowly lifted and lowered my body. After resting a little, I began to swim north, now without any goal at all. The sky was glowing with rainbow colors. I realized the sun had set. Night had come. My last night in the ocean. To the northeast, either at the sea or on the shore, I saw two lights. They were close to each other, flashing at regular intervals. It must have been a fishing boat, catching fish by light. They seemed very far away, but I had no choice except to swim toward them. I had to swim somewhere, anywhere. My legs stopped obeying me and hung helplessly. I moved forward only with my arms. From time to time, I lost consciousness for long moments. Afraid of drowning, I lowered my mask and put the mouthpiece back in. It turned out that one could float like that without fear of sinking, as long as the snorkel was kept at the right angle. I felt a kind of numbness. I began to freeze. Finally, my legs stopped responding and hung lifelessly. My lungs, however, kept working rhythmically, just as at the beginning of the journey. That I owed to my long breathing training in the yoga system. I could still move my arms for a long time, but my consciousness began to fade more and more often. And when it returned, I saw myself swimming toward the lights, and beyond those lights I could make out palm trees on the shore, a dark edge of forest behind them, and trees rising higher and higher and nascent into the mountains. Then darkness fell over me again, an impenetrable blackness with nothing in it except 2 or 3 flickering lights ahead. My disbelief had betrayed me. Only later did I realize that I had really seen an actual island before me. It turned out that the same current that had treacherously carried me away from Siergaio's eastern shore had, after several hours, brought me back toward it, but now from the south. I found myself in relatively calm waters, near several other Philippine islands. Had I waited until morning, I would have seen land on the horizon from 3 sides at once. Once again, I calculated my chances. To reach Mindanao, I would have to swim more than 40 kilometers. Even if I could stay afloat that long, I wouldn't survive another prolonged storm. My rhythmic breathing would eventually fail. I thought it was time to say goodbye. To my wife, daughter, to my mother, to my friends. I was suddenly surrounded by a cloud of love and peace. It's hard to say how long that feeling lasted. When it faded, I felt as if I had awakened from a long, blissful rest. The pain in my muscles was gone. The shivering stopped. I could move again for a while. I kept swimming toward the blinking lights, but then a quiet, clear voice inside me said, "Swim toward the sound of the surf." I didn't hear any surf, and I couldn't have told myself that consciously. Yet the voice, or perhaps a clear thought, appeared again. I listened closely. Indeed, after a while, far off to my left, I heard a dull roar that I had previously ignored. It sounded like a noise of jet engines taking off. The inner voice kept insisting that I should swim toward the sound of the surf. Stanislav turned left and swam toward that distant roar. From that moment on, he lost track of time and, it seems, fell into trance again. At some point, I realized that someone was swimming beside me, on my left. I was talking to him without turning my head, still stroking forward. Then suddenly, I snapped out of it, turned and saw no one. I understood that both of those who had been speaking were inside me, and I was also a third one, a watcher, listening to their conversation. I remembered nothing of what they said, except that it was about me and about the danger I was in. Whether they spoke aloud or not, I heard their voices clearly, as if they were 2 strangers arguing. I even remembered being surprised to hear them say that I was in danger because my state of mind was calm, as if I were quietly walking down a road at night, far from any human settlement. I had completely lost my sense of time. It seemed to me that I had been swimming forever, for an eternity. Then a new wave lifted me several meters forward, and the water suddenly became shallower, just above my knees. Another wave washed over me. I floated again. When it receded, I tried to stand but couldn't feel the bottom. That meant I had entered a lagoon, and the reef was now behind me. It felt as if I had found myself in a calm bay. I decided to swim back to the reef and rest. Feeling a steep wall beneath me, I tried to climb into its edge, but a large wave immediately threw me back. It was much easier to stay afloat in the quiet lagoon than to struggle with the waves at the reef's edge. I looked around. Total darkness, nothing anywhere. But in the center of every lagoon, as any schoolchild knows, there must be an island. Finally, the sound of the surf could be heard from any one direction. I turned my back to it and swam straight ahead without stopping. It felt strange to move through such sudden stillness over a surface smooth as a lake. At last I could lift my mask onto my forehead, push the snorkel aside and take a better look around. I remembered the sharks again. First I checked all the uncovered parts of my body. There was no pain, but I knew from experience that in water, even deep wounds didn't hurt. Then I saw blood on my scrubbed knees and tied them with my neckerchief. I must have turned them on the sharp coral ledges of the reef when I tried to climb it multiple times. There could easily be more sharks in the lagoon than on the windward side of the reef. It was still unknown how long I would have to swim to reach the island. Blood attracts sharks, even those species that normally don't attack humans. The sound of the surf was now far behind me, resembling distant thunder. I kept swimming blindly, trying only to keep that sound at my back. Swimming became harder and harder. In addition to overall exhaustion, I felt my breathing becoming faster. The breath holding near the reef had taken its toll. Finally, I saw a cluster of lights slightly to my left. They looked unfriendly somehow, but they didn't seem too far away. My breathing kept getting worse. Every 15 minutes, I tried to float motionless, but it no longer helped. I simply didn't have enough air. I was gasping desperately, wheezing. The depth beneath me was no more than 5 meters. Suddenly, against the dark sky, I made out the tops of palm trees, much closer than the lights. I swam toward them. Ahead were the lights of some village. I wanted terribly to tie down and rest, even for a few minutes, but I was afraid the lights would go out, and I would have to swim who knows where again. I could barely breathe, only wheeze. Once more, I tried to feel the bottom with my foot, and suddenly, unbelievably, I touched something solid. I was standing chest deep in the water and couldn't believe it wasn't a dream. Ahead, as far as I could see, was the dark surface of the lagoon. The water was shallow, and I have to walk chest deep for a long time, then swim again, and then wade waist deep once more before finally stepping onto the shore. In those moments, I feared sharks more than anything in the world. If they were to eat me now, I shuddered at the thought. It would simply be too unfair. Staggering, I walked out onto the coral sand under the tall palms. Only then did I truly feel safe. The ocean was behind me, and with it, my entire past. I sat down on the sand and leaned against a palm tree. The ground beneath me was still swaying. I felt overwhelming exhaustion and immediately fell asleep there on the sand under the palms. I didn't sleep long. Ant and mosquito bites woke me. I felt severe chills like from sunburn and decided to go inland. It might be warmer there. With eager curiosity, I examined everything around me. So this was what the mysterious tropical jungle looked like. He had come ashore at a different part of the lagoon. Unexpectedly, he stumbled upon an unfinished canoe, a pirogue. It was dry enough inside. He spread fresh banana leaves and tried to get some rest, but the mosquito bites were too painful, and he managed to doze off only briefly. About an hour later, I climbed out of the pirogue and set off along the shore at random. My entire mouth was inflamed from salt water and the snorkel mouthpiece. I was thirsty, but not to the point of dying from thirst. I couldn't get used to the sheer pleasure of feeling solid ground beneath my feet. It was wonderful. The sand was coarse and clean. The sea breeze gently cooled my skin. Back on the ship, when I decided to escape, I hadn't been at all sure I would make it to land, so I hadn't prepared even the simplest things. No matches, no knife, not a single document. I had nothing except my amulet and swimming gear. I felt like Robinson Crusoe. I was already in love with my island. I had everything one could dream of: tall mountains, green jungles, and the warm ocean stretching to the horizon. Then, from the darkness beside me, came some movement. Out of the shadows emerged human figures. They were islanders. Apparently, they had just approached. The one standing closest was a dark-skinned man wearing a white shirt and light trousers. He gave a frightened cry and leapt backward. The others froze as if turned to stone. A long, tense silence followed. I had to do something immediately to show them my peaceful intentions. I threw my fins and mask aside, raised my open palms to show I was unarmed. I had once read that this gesture signified peace among islanders. Then, with a wide motion, I pointed toward the ocean and made several swimming gestures. 2 or 3 minutes of silent tension passed before one of the islanders finally moved and began slowly approaching me. Later, I learned the reason for their fearful hesitation. Not far from where we met was a cemetery, and my body was still faintly glowing in the dark from phosphorescence. At first, they had taken me for a ghost. The tension gradually eased. The first to approach were the children. They cautiously touched me one by one, pulling their hands back immediately. And then all began talking at once in a language I didn't understand. From it, I could make out only one word: Americano. I stood surrounded by them, smiling. It was a large family, a father and children, apparently returning from night fishing. The father still stood aside, wary. The children noticed my fins, mask, and snorkel on the sand and rushed to examine it. The girl of about 12 asked me in a mix of English and Spanish who I was and where I came from. I spoke a little English, so we managed to understand each other. They began asking endless questions. For some reason, they thought there had been a shipwreck in the ocean and that I was the only survivor. They kept asking me, where are the others? I tried to explain that the ship was intact, that there had been no wreck, that I had jumped into the sea alone. But they simply couldn't comprehend it. Then came a question, innocent in essence, but deeply philosophical. Why? I couldn't help laughing when I saw myself from the outside. What could I possibly answer? Indeed, why? It was as if they had asked me, why do you leave? Another question, why didn't the sharks touch you? Also left me speechless. I had to show them my amulet and say that it protected me from sharks. They immediately believed me. But then came even more difficult questions. The children began to examine me, testing me on science, religion, and philosophy all at once. I didn't really want to go through that whole examination to the end, but even though the girl spoke English and didn't fully understand me, she treated me with respect. They invited me to their home. We walked for about an hour along the sandy shore of the lagoon until we reached it. It was a large bungalow on stilts among tall palms, the kind I had only seen in films about New Guinea. We climbed a high steps and entered inside. There was no electric lights. One of the adults lit a kerosene lamp. Large shadows of the running children leaped across the walls. There were at least a dozen of them by then. Many dark-skinned people surrounded me, looking at me with such curiosity as if I had arrived from another planet. I sat on a bench by a wooden table, almost as if in that other world I had left only a few hours ago, and could only smile in response. Everything around me was so incredible that I wanted to pinch myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. An elderly woman, the mistress of the house, offered me some kind of hot local drink. After just a few sips, I realized how desperately thirsty I was. When I finished everything that was in the teapot, the hostess, without surprise, put an entire bucket on the fire. I kept drinking glass after glass, but I refused food. My mouth still hurt badly. The eldest girl, the same one I had met on the shore, quickly brought order with a few confident comments and took charge of the conversation. At first, it resembled a talk between two lunatics. The gap in understanding between us was as vast as the distance between our worlds. Even if the physical distance between us could be overcome, the gulf between our minds was impossible to bridge. The islanders barely knew anything about the outside world, and they just couldn't understand why I did what I did. I stood before them as something utterly absurd, completely outside their clear and familiar worldview. They were tense but persistent in trying to feed this strange fragment back into the chain of things they understood. Their questions bewildered me. I struggled to answer, but they simply couldn't grasp my explanations. Then the girl took on the role of a psychologist. With some inner intuition, she seemed to sense the spiritual level of the visitor from another world. She asked questions the way a doctor might speak to a madman, with all the politeness such a case requires, to avoid any possible offense. And she succeeded. She found something in common, something both sides could understand. Finally, our conversation began to take on clearer outlines, following ordinary human logic. The bungalow gradually filled with more and more guests. I felt comfortable among them. They were simple, kind people. A white man hadn't been seen there for many years, and from the ocean side, never in the entire history of the island. They told me I was in the village of General Luna, on the island of Siargao. That meant my calculations had been correct. I knew that the captain and navigator of the liner would be the most astonished by that. Indeed, it was a miracle. I had seen the map only once and only for a moment, but the captain must have changed course, steering away from the island. That's why the distance had seemed so much greater than I expected. They laid me to sleep on the bed with a mosquito net. I fell asleep the instant my head touched the pillow. When I awoke from someone's touch, I couldn't at first understand where I was. It was bright daylight. Sunbeams streamed through the cracks of the closed shutters. The mistress of the house gave me water to wash and handed me a cup of the same drink as the day before. I was surprised that they had woken me so early. There was some unusual commotion in the house. The master suddenly offered me a shirt and a pair of sturdy trousers, completely unnecessary to me, but it would have been impolite to refuse, so I accepted the gift gratefully. Something prompted me to step out onto the porch. Below, under the palms, I saw a crowd of dark-skinned people, no fewer than 200. When I appeared, they stood up and burst into applause, shouting something in their local language. I realized they had all come to see me, the man who had emerged from the ocean and had been waiting for my appearance for quite some time. I smiled and raised my hand in greeting, as the ancient Romans once did. I couldn't think of a gesture more fitting for the occasion. Then my eyes stopped on something that made me shudder to my core. My God, why? Beyond the crowd in the jungle, I saw a green jeep. Beside it stood men in a uniform, rifles slung over their shoulders. Among the locals, a passage opened, and two soldiers, officers, walked toward me. Before getting into the jeep, I took one last look at the familiar blue mountains. In daylight, the island seemed even more beautiful. It was him, the very same island I had dreamed of since childhood, my cherished island. I had dreamed of its palms, its banana groves, its fragrant wind, its white sand, its blue sky. I had imagined its jungles while sitting over my school books in my sleepy little hometown. I never had time to light a fire there, nor to build a hut, nor to plant a tree, but still I had seen it with my own eyes. I had reached it. I had stood upon its shore. Fate had been kind to me. Though during the 6 months I spent in the Philippines, I was considered a prisoner and even spent a month and a half in jail. But wasn't that in the end simply a continuation of my adventure? What sunsets and sunrises there were, and wasn't this what I had dreamed of so long ago, back when before me stood only the impenetrable grey fence? I hadn't planned my escape as one plans an expedition or a long journey, and yet I had always been ready for it, for any favorable moment. It couldn't be said that I was driven by political reasons. I simply felt that Soviet power was a hidden evil and that it existed in one form or another in everything that surrounded me. There were two ways out: to change the world or to change yourself. My dissident friends chose the first path. My Christian and yoga Buddhist friends, I was with them, tried to change themselves. I was part of a system, but I was also making myself into a human being, not just a cog in the machine. Yoga for me was not a set of exercises. It was a system of liberation. To practice yoga under conditions of total lack of freedom meant constant overcoming. Every moment in yoga gave me drops of freedom, and no one could take that away from me. That daring escape on the edge of madness is now called one of the most extraordinary and dangerous adventures of the 20th century. The true meaning of the trial lay in transformation, or rather in the destruction of one's former self. The ultimate goal was to endure. Whether one survived or not was secondary. His brother Valentin turned out to be the only one who suffered. He was fired from his job. He had been a brilliant long-distance navigator. The authorities didn't touch the scientist's first wife, nor his son, nor his second wife, the one he had left behind for the sake of escape. As for the oceanographer himself, after the investigation, they dropped the espionage suspicions and finally let him go to Canada, where his sister lived. There he first worked in a pizzeria, and later at a company producing underwater equipment. He also sailed again, this time on research vessels in the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Stanislav moved to Israel in 1986 and married again. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, his relatives invited him to visit, but he never went back, perhaps because of painful memories or a sense of guilt toward his brother, whose life he had changed forever. Sadly, Valentin died young.
For an ordinary person, surviving that long in the ocean without food or water would have been impossible, but Kurilov endured for more than 2 days. He had expected to swim from 18 to 20 kilometers, but ended up covering a full 100. When he was brought to the administrative center, the Filipino official didn't know what to do with this strange Russian fugitive. Kurilov's escape from the Soviet Union was reported by international media, and the news eventually reached his homeland through Voice of America. In January 1998, Stanislav died during a diving expedition. Together with his partner, he became entangled in fishing nets and remained underwater for an hour longer than planned. According to safety regulations, after such an incident, the next dive should be postponed for at least a week. But Kurilov decided he was fine and dove again 2 days later. He managed to signal that he felt unwell, but the team couldn't help him in time. When he was brought to the surface ahead of schedule, the most unusual fugitive of the Soviet Union was already gone. He was 61 years old, a man who had performed a true feat in the name of his dream. His incredible story still stirs the imagination. How could he have done it? What kind of courage does it take to attempt something like that? Some will call him a traitor, others a hero. What do you think he was? Write your thoughts in the comments.